get to listen to the rerun because the clock on here is off.
Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum, to the waves of the ocean, to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. We're going to have a great show. We have Rabbi Wayne Dosick coming on to talk about the real name of God. I thought God's name was God. Who thought knew he had a real name? Anyway, but before we bring the rabbi on, let me remind you that Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com, where you can find out information about getting a medical intuition evaluation, energy healing, or a clairvoyant reading. Also, exciting news, if you go to www.soulhealer.com, I have finally posted some information about my forthcoming book, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. So there's information about that. You can get a little preview of what's coming up. We also purchased a domain, which would be Man-Made, The Chronicles, which is like really cool looking. You'll have to go look. And we also are taking pre-orders, so if you get all excited and you want to get your copy in advance, you can go there and check it out. Also, the book will be signed by the authors, myself, and Wayne LaLiberty, my co-author. And you know what they say about signatures? They're priceless. Woohoo! Anyway, let me tell you a little bit about Rabbi Wayne Dosick and get him on the air. Rabbi Wayne Dosick is an educator, writer, spiritual guide, and healer who teaches and counsels about faith and spirit, ethical values, life transformations, and evolving human consciousness. He is the founder and spiritual leader of the Elijah Minyan, an adjunct professor at the University of San Diego, and the award-winning author of 8 books, including the highly acclaimed and much beloved Golden Rules, the 10 ethical values parents need to teach their children. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio, the author of the book, The Real Name of God, and his website is soulbysoul.com, Rabbi Wayne Dosick. Hi, Rebbe. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Let me just make one correction. That Soul by Soul website is there. That has to do with our indigo work. The website for the book we're about to discuss, The Real Name of God, is www.godisanochi. That's GODISANOCHI.com.
Okay, and we'll go ahead when we put the archive on this weekend and add that on so that they have everything.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to start simple, but what inspired you to write The Real Name of God? It seems like a lot of your background and teaching has really been in working with children and personal transformation. How did you get into this topic?
Well, I've been a rabbi all my life, practically. Certainly 40 years of career and 5, 6, 7 years of preparation and youth groups and all those kinds of things. So I've been teaching and spiritually leading Judaism, Jewish congregations all my career, and I taught at the University of San Diego, which is a Catholic university. So I was teaching the only courses in Jewish studies and the Department of Religion of the Catholic University, which is a fabulous gig, I must say. So in essence, I work for God, And yet I had some great questions and some great difficulties. So I'll just tell you a couple of the questions. The first question is, how does the one perfect God have so many different names? There are 7 proper nouns in the Torah, that is Genesis through Deuteronomy. There are another 8 or 9 names in the prophets and the writings, the second and third sections of the Bible. Christianity has names for God. Islam has names for God. Hinduism has, some say 99, some say 999 names of God. So how could the one perfect God have so many names? And second, how does this one perfect God behave in such a paradoxical manner? Because on one hand, we read in the Bible that God is good and sweet and kind and compassionate and wraps us in tender love and gives us highest ethical values by which to live. And on the other hand, we find a God who is harsh and angry and militant and male hierarchical and opens up the earth to swallow the unfaithful and kills off enemies. How do we reconcile that paradox between those two behaviors? So I said to myself, there has to be more to God than these questions. And the sage taught me that you don't know something until you know its name. And so that's where I began saying, well, maybe none of these names that we have for God is God's real name, and maybe I can go look for it in its original source in the Bible.
Well, those are a couple of great questions that you started off with, and I'll bet it led you on some good twists and turns as you started following that line of questioning along.
Well, it does, because, of course, the name that we use most for God is in Hebrew. The Hebrew letters are Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey, usually pronounced in Judaism as Adonai, pronounced in academic scholarship as Yahweh, and this was the Yahweh that had these contradictory and paradoxical behaviors. And at the same time, as I said, there are 7 other names for God in the Torah itself, and I had to go looking at all these places and all these names and see what God was doing, who God was. My original question was, who is God?
Who's God? That guy in the sky. Everybody knows that.
Well, yes, and we get stuck theologically that way, because we Jews have a prayer on the high holidays that does exactly that. It images God sitting in the high heavens on the throne of the divine, surrounded by the angels, and choosing between strict judgment and tender compassion, tender mercy. And sometimes what happens is our young children get stuck on this image of that God in the sky who makes these capricious decisions, and they go on to get PhDs in French literature and nuclear physics, and they have 12-year-old theologies. And so I wanted to help people move beyond that stuckness.
I thought that in Judaism that knowing or saying the name of God, the Yud Hey Vav Hey name, was prohibited.
Well, it's prohibited outside of prayer and Scripture. It's spoken within prayer and Scripture. We call it Adonai because we don't know the vowel structure. Hebrew has 22 consonants and no vowels. So we don't have the vowel structure. So some say Yahweh, some say Yehovah, some say Jehovah. But it was obviously a very sacred name. And so our sages gave us a substitute, which they said Adonai, which simply means my master. And so in Scripture reading and in prayer we say Adonai, but then that substitute became too holy to say except in prayer and Torah reading. And so a lot of people call God Hashem, which simply means the name, which is the substitute for Adonai, which is the substitute for the pronunciation for Yud Hey Vav Hey. That's how that works.
Right, and I had even heard that the comment, and I'm trying to articulate this correctly, that if we as humans knew the correct vowel placement with the Yud Hey Vav Hey, that it would be more powerful than any person could handle, or it would provide the means of creation. I mean, there's all these things tied to even that name.
Well, that's correct. But we also have within the mystical tradition, there's a 22-letter name of God. There's a 42-letter name of God. There's the name that the high priest spoke in the Holy Temple only once a year on Yom Kippur that seems to have gotten lost. There are all kinds of names, and the mystical tradition gives us all kinds of powers to those names.
So why do you think there are so many different names tied to God?
The perfect question, good doctor. The perfect question. So here's the results of some of my studies, some of my research. God is a beach ball. Now, I know that sounds a little silly, but picture a beach ball. A beach ball has many, many different colored panels. So each one of the names that we have for God is one of those colored panels. But each one of those colored panels in naming God is only one characteristic or attribute or aspect of God. And so we have all these names where the people gave in to what they were describing as God's energy at that particular moment in time and space. My question was, what's the name of the whole beach ball? Now, the closest the Jews ever came was to name God, the Kabbalists in the 13th century named God Ein Sof. Ein Sof literally means without end, the infinite one. Well, that makes good sense, but it's only the energy of that moment. The New Age calls God Source, which makes perfect sense because God is the source of all, the source of everything. So my beginning question was, could I go back into the Bible itself and find the name of the divine beach ball hiding there in plain sight for all these centuries and millennia, just waiting for the right energetic moment in time to be revealed?
Okay, but
that's what I found.
Okay, but don't reveal it yet, because I want to talk about the beach ball a minute.
Go ahead.
It almost sounds like when you talk about Kabbalah, they talk about the Sephiroth being the 10 emanations of God, and each Sephiroth is, one aspect of God. Are we kind of talking about a very similar concept here?
Well, the Sefirot are pathways to God, and so it's not quite clear if there's God's attributes or our attributes, those 10 Sefirot, and actually there are 11 or 12, and they are very linear and very hierarchical. They go from the bottom, where we dwell on earth, all the way to the top, where God supposedly dwells in the heavens. My wife, Ellen Kaufman Dosick, and I wrote a book a number of years ago called 20-Minute Kabbalah, the daily personal spiritual practice that brings you to God, your soul knowing, and your heart's desires. And there we saw the Sefirot in a new order, not hierarchical and linear from top to bottom, but spiral, beginning in Tiferet, beginning in the heart space. And we gave each one of those Sefirot a chant to chant each day for 20, 30, 60 seconds as a spiral journey from you to God and from God to you. And so, yes, the emanations, the Sefirot, are steps, are attributes, are emanations, are feelings, are emotions, are qualities and characteristics which bring us into connection with God.
But it's not God's, but it's more about us and not God.
It's about God's attributes and us reflecting God's attributes.
Okay.
We who are created in the image of God imitate God.
Okay. But are All right, but taking it a step back, are we kind of talking about a similar concept except about God?
We're talking about a kind of a kind of similar concept, but my question was, how do we go beyond the attributes? How do we go beyond the attributes? It's like this.
Okay.
It's like this. Each of us, let's say, we know for sure each of us has a mother, right? That's how we got here.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody might call mother, and somebody might call mother, mommy, or mom, or ma, or mama. Same mother, 4 siblings in the family might call her 4 different names. And sometimes that's reflective of the relationship. Sometimes it's reflective of the characteristic. You know, you remember when your mother would say, Wayne David? You knew what in her voice and in her tone and her use of my name that I was in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm.
If she called me Wayne-Ali, or if she called me Velzali, my Yiddish nickname, so I knew it was a different kind of talk that was going to happen. So it's the same thing. We have all these characteristics of God that are reflected in the names of God and how we call God. And we might call God 2 different things, 3 different things, 5 different things all at the same time. I wanted to know, what is the real name of Mother, Father?
Of Mother, Father?
A Mother, Father, God, yes.
So
the
there's actually like a female in there in the whole mix of this whole thing?
Because when you think of it, the beach ball is everything. Everything. It's the wholeness, and that's the issue. What is the wholeness? Who is the whole God who encompasses, and Jung finally got this with the Jungian archetypes, who gets the God who is male and female, light and dark, love and hate, good and evil, right and wrong. It's all within the same God. And basically, God is saying to us, I am the wholeness of the universe. Here's my panel on the beach ball of blue, that represents good. Here's my panel on the beach ball of red, which represents evil. And I am hoping that you choose the panel of blue much more than you choose the panel of evil. It's all within me. It's all within you. What makes me God and what makes you human is the choices that we make.
But even just that one statement that it is both male and female and all-encompassing kind of falls out the boundaries that I normally would associate with Judaism in general, doesn't it?
Why is that?
I don't know.
The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. One means everything. One means wholeness. One means total, complete, unique, separate. So that's what I went looking for. I went looking for the name of the whole, complete, total fullness of God.
Okay, so what'd you find?
Well, before I tell you what I found, I have to tell you what I didn't find, and that is that the word Elohim, the name Elohim, which is often taken as a name of God, and Christianity knows this name as well, is not a name of God. Rather, it is the office of God on earth. It's like saying the president, or the CEO. So at any given time, Source, the beach ball, puts an aspect of Source, one of the colored panels, into the office of Elohim to be the deputy representative God on earth, the COO who is representing the CEO. So it means that after the fall, after Adam and Eve, after the separation, the fullness of Source withdrew and said, I am going to appoint an aspect of me to hold the office of God on earth, to be in the office of God on earth, and that aspect will bring its characteristics and its attributes and will represent me on earth. So we have, for example, in the 6th chapter of the book of Exodus, the line that says, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai. That's one of the aspects of God, one of the panels of the beach ball. El Shaddai is characterized by the warm, compassionate, nurturing, caring aspect of God. The word Shaddai originally meant mountains. It came to mean breasts. So it's the mothering aspect. So for the patriarchs and the matriarchs, that was the attribute of me that they needed. And then the rest of that verse continues, but my name Yahweh, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, I never revealed to them. At that moment, Source, the beach ball, is taking El Shaddai out of the office of Elohim and putting Yahweh in. Why? Because Yahweh, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Adonai, is the male, hierarchical, authoritarian, militant God, and that aspect of God is needed for confronting Pharaoh and bringing the Hebrew slaves out of Egyptian slavery. And so at that moment, the CEO changes COOs for a particular time and a particular purpose.
So is he the mean one? And was El Shaddai the nice one? Although when you go back to prior to Abraham, if El Shaddai was the guy in charge, he's the one that brought the flood about. And he did some pretty mean stuff too.
Yeah, that's true. And the problem is, of course, that we had an oral tradition for centuries, if not millennia. I mean, the events of the early parts of Genesis, and if you're writing about gods who come to Earth or extraterrestrial gods, I don't know, are you in the Sitchin tradition about the Anunnaki and so on?
Well,
in your new book?
We talk about ancient aliens, not specifically about the Anunnaki, but
okay.
Yes.
All right, so you understand then. So basically, we had an oral tradition for centuries and millennia until it finally got written down. And by the time it got written down, there were folk tales and tribal tales, and there were this name for God and that name for God and a bunch of other names for God. And obviously, at some point, the editor had to write down a story. Now, we know in the Bible there are sometimes two stories of creation, and there are two stories of the giving of the Ten Commandments and so on. So sometimes one tribal tradition didn't overcome the other two stories of the creation of human beings. And so the editor put in both. But the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, by the time the Bible was written, the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh was the accepted name, and regardless of who was in the office, that was the name that was recorded most often.
Okay. So you're not of the belief that Moses wrote the Torah?
I am of the belief that Moses was a great servant of God, and that something happened at Sinai that great human beings were given. The human beings were given the greatness of God's glory and God's word, and that human authors, divinely inspired, wrote those texts much later.
Okay. And that's a good thing to know, where you kind of position yourself. I mean, because there's a lot of people that believe that Moses wrote the Torah, and that's just how it is.
Right.
Okay.
But certainly there was interaction between God and Moses.
Oh, that I totally
there's no
believe.
question. Certainly there was interaction between God and the people at Sinai. No question about that. Did Moses carve 5 books into stone at God's command and become the loyal and devoted secretary? I don't think so.
Okay. We can move on.
Okay. So now
you
ask, what did I find?
This anyway.
So the name of God, the real name of God, is Anochi. It's Anochi. That's why the website is called GodIsAnochi.com. So Anochi is usually translated as I. But Hebrew has another word for I, which is Ani. And Ani is the simple, personal, ego, the personal self, the personal individual presence. Anochi is the wholeness, the totality, the fullness of the I self. And so every time, the word Anochi is used 359 times in the Bible. Every time it is in the voice of God. It is when the totality of God, no deputy or representative, but the totality of God is vital to the teaching or to the event. So, for example, the Ten Commandments begin, Anochi Adonai Elohecha, usually translated as, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. I translated, Anochi, I source, put Yahweh into the office of Elohim to bring you out of the land of Egypt. Every time it's a vital teaching or event, there's Anochi. And Anochi is also used in the voice of human beings, as in Hashomer Achi Anochi, am I my brother's keeper, am I my brother's guardian. And every time it is used there is when a person is asking, how do I come into the fullness of my God self? How do I touch God within me? So what we learn is, not only Anochi is the fullness, so it's gender full, not male, female, so we don't have to deal with the he, she, it, but it's a gender full word. But we also learn, and not only do we learn that the God of anger and revenge and vengefulness is only one aspect of God, but we also learn very clearly that Anochi is the God of the grand universe, the God of creation and history and ultimate redemption, and that God is the immanent God, the God deep, deep within inside each and every one of us. It is God's breath that gives us life, as we learn from Adam in the story of creation. And when we die, it is, from this earth at least, our souls are eternal, but when we die from this earth, it is God taking away our breath and returning us to the inanimate form. So we learn of the greatness of the God of the universe and that God who is intimately involved with our lives. And so we are led to create a deep, personal, intimate, loving relationship with God. It teaches us that we can have the communal covenant, the relationship between God and every person on earth, and that we can have the personal covenant, the relationship between me and God, between you and God, between every individual person and God.
So I don't mean to make a major detour here, but I am. When you say that word, Anochi, it just makes me, since you brought up Sitchin, you opened the door, sorry, it just makes me think Anunnaki.
Of course, because all the name gods, all the god names, of antiquity are all A-N or E-N. So in Sumerian, in Akkadian, in all the ancient languages, you've got the Anu, you've got the Sitchin's Anunnaki, you've got the Anu, you've got En, you've got El, so all these kinds of names. So obviously when the name was being given or the name was being revealed, it was it was the energy of the God name. And so the Jews or the Bible writers were not so unique in feeling the God energy. The ancients knew that God energy and knew that name. They just didn't have quite the right name.
Okay. When you talk, and I'm just going to play a little devil's advocate here, when you talk about these different aspects of God and God putting, Yahweh into the role of God, it almost has the look and feel that we're really talking about multiple gods and not necessarily aspects of one God.
Well, I if you're hearing it that way, then I'm not conveying it correctly. So it's my fault for not using the right language to convey it. No, it is one God. Look, here's you, okay? Here's Dr. Rita Louise. I don't know anything about you. We just met a few minutes ago, actually. So I don't know, but you have one role, as a individual human being. You have one role as a wife. You have another role as a mother. You have another role as a radio host. You have another role as a PTA president. You have another role as a guest speaker at people's conventions. All of those things are you. Each is an aspect or an attribute of you, but there's one you. So what we're doing here is we're acknowledging God's many aspects and attributes and characteristics, the one God. And by the way, I must say that that's the fourth and last, but so vital and so wonderful thing about finding the one name of the one God, and that is that we can now say to all three biblically sourced, Abrahamic sourced religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we all have different approaches, and you may call God Adonai, and you may call God Jesus, and you may call God Allah, and you may have many, many, many other names for God, but we are all sourced by the one God. We all have one parent. We all now know that one parent's name in the text from which we claim our beginnings, and as we build up awareness of oneness and oneness consciousness in this world, which is, of course, what we must have in order for this world to survive, what we are hearing is God is the father, mother of us all, and God loves all God's children equally, and Anochi doesn't care whether we address him, her in Hebrew or Sanskrit or Arabic or Latin, or it doesn't matter. With the one God of the one people of the one world, and the more and more we become aware of that, the more and more we come deeper, deeper into oneness consciousness, the more and more we have a chance for this world to survive, and not only to survive, but to be creative and spectacular in its survival.
But it seems like, and I'm just going to go with you, that most people really, all right, I don't want to say most people, because that's way too big of a generalization. There are a lot of people who are not really interested in that oneness consciousness. They're into the me consciousness and what can I get and how much I can collect and accumulate and how much power I can have.
Well, you're exactly right. And that's the tragedy and the downfall of our world right now. It's a me, me, me world. And, you know, let's just take the United States, for example. I'll give you the example that I talk about with kids all the time. When I was little, 8, 10, 12, I grew up in Chicago, and the Chicago White Sox were my team. And 1959 was the highlight of my childhood when they won the pennant. And we knew all the players, and we knew their uniform numbers, and we knew their batting averages, and we knew that they were part of the community. They weren't making multi-millions in those days, so some of them worked in the local car dealership or the local supermarket during the off-season. And they would come to the synagogues and the churches and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and sign autographs. And one of the people on the team's grandmother lived in my neighborhood, and every once in a while he'd come and throw out a ball at the playground or even play catch with us once in a while. When the night the White Sox won the pennant, the mayor turned on the fire siren, the air raid signal, to celebrate. Now, my grandmother, she should rest in peace, was a great woman, but she didn't know from baseball, and this was the middle of the Cold War. She thought the Russians were coming. But the whole community was watching on the little black and white television sets to see that the White Sox won the pennant. What happened? Now, I don't want to be negative here because this country was born and built on the backs of labor unions. But we got free agency in baseball. And now no longer does a player care about the city or the team, with an exception of a Cal Ripken or a Tony Gwynn or a fellow like that who stays with the same team the whole career. But all they care about is their own statistics. Me, me, me. And therefore build up their own statistics to sell themselves to the highest bidder when they become free agents. And that's become the model for our children. So instead of a cooperative team model, we've taken on this me, me, me generation. So what does that lead to? It leads to a woman spilling a cup of coffee on herself in her own car and suing the restaurant because the coffee was too hot. or it leads to, God forbid, but it happened, a woman strapping her own children into the back seat of the car, pushing the car into the lake, watching the children drown, and then saying, oh, it's not my fault, it's not my fault. I was incested as a kid, so I'm not responsible for being a good mother. Me, me, me. So those of us who are doing the work that you're doing every single week on your program, and those of us who are in the trenches, who are leading the synagogues and the churches and the mosques and the nonprofit organizations, and as the first President Bush put it, 100,000 points of light, we are saying to this world, the me generation will doom us unless we understand that we have to be cooperative, we have to hold hands with each other, we have to make this world work as a singular unit. That doesn't mean we all have to be the same. There is great, great joy and benefit in the differences. One of my closest friends is a Jesuit priest. He doesn't want me to be Catholic. He doesn't want me to be Catholic, and I don't want him to be Jewish. We each have our own paths, and each one is brilliant and beautiful. But unless we are cooperative, unless we recognize the worth and the goodness in each other's pathways, unless we hold hands for the common good, instead of America being the melting pot, it's become a frayed quilt of special interests. That's what will doom us. We have to come together, and now we have a way to say to everyone, we have one God who loves us all, who created us, who loves us all equally, and who wants us to join hands in cooperation to save this world. You can't say, I can pollute the skies over my factory without knowing that the smoke and the pollution goes across the country. We know this now. I mean, you can't have an earthquake in Japan. It's not our earthquake. We can't have an earthquake without the debris coming to the shores of California. So we know this is a completely interconnected world, and that old Zen idea that the flap of one butterfly changes everything, everywhere is absolutely true.
On an individual, personal level, I can see how that could happen. But you also mentioned corporations and the factory having smoke go out into the air. You know, what it makes me think of is companies like ones that genetically engineer crops. I won't say the name. And they know that there are health risks, or the pharmaceutical companies that produce products that they know that they create more health problems than what their benefit is, but they kind of can't get out of their own way and go, okay, but, you know, this is for the people.
Well, we have great individual power, and I'll give you both a macro and a micro example. The macro example is in 1987, when a bunch of us held hands across the world and sang songs, and they called it the harmonic convergence. You remember that?
I do.
So everybody laughed at us. They thought we were fools. And what's it been, 25 years since the harmonic conversion?
Mm-hmm.
So if I told you 26 years ago that 25 years from now, the Soviet Union will have fallen, the satellite countries will become democratic, blacks and whites will be riding the bus together in Johannesburg, in South Africa, Protestants and Catholics will stop shooting at each other in Northern Ireland, and now and then Jews and Arabs will sit down at a peace table, you would have called me absolutely crazy. And yet all those things have happened. And so from the macro rise up great individuals, a Lech Walesa, a Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and they can inspire us all. But it also means that we have the individual power. Two examples. One of the great issues on this earth is hungry people. People who are hungry, people who don't have enough to eat, people who literally starve to death. Some 25 years ago, I've been involved in this organization from its beginning. A little more than 25 years ago, a rabbi and a kosher and a sociologist were standing in a parking lot in a synagogue in Los Angeles, and up drove the in-house kosher caterer in his new, very expensive car. And they looked at each other and said, there must be a lot of money in kosher catering. And they found out even 25 years ago that just the Jews of America spend between $500 million and $800 million a year on food and drink for our celebrations, for our bar mitzvahs, our weddings, so on. So they said to the Jewish community of America, here's an idea. Whatever you spend on your celebration, send us 3%. Voluntarily tax yourself 3%. And then give the money to invite another person to your Passover Seder, or the money that you save fasting on Yom Kippur. And we'll collect it, and we will get experts in hunger to accept grant proposals from institutions and organizations that feed hungry people. And we'll give out this money. And let's see if we can help feed hungry people in America. Well, the first year they collected enough money to give out $27,000. Last year they collected enough money to give out $4.3 million. Just from individuals. One idea in a parking lot that led to $4.3 million being given to help feed hungry people. Another even closer example, I was in, I believe it was Memphis, Tennessee. I was giving a talk about my book, which you mentioned at the beginning, Golden Rules, the 10 Ethical Values Parents Need to Teach Their Children. And during the question period, a man raised his hand and said, Rabbi, please tell me, my daughter is 8 years old, and she wants, I have to get her all, just like all her friends, all these beeping, bopping electronic devices, an iPad, an iPhone, a this, a that, a computer, a game, a da-da-da-da-da. How do I stop her from that? Now, Doctor, I will tell you, this was not my most politic answer ever in my career. But I looked at the man and I said, sir, keep your wallet in your pants. Who buys an 8-year-old an iPad? The very father who's asking me how he can keep his daughter from having an iPad. The fact is, parents have tremendous power, tremendous responsibility and obligation, which parents often give off to others, because we have the power to say no. We have the power in our fingertips to turn off the computer or to turn it on, to turn off the television, or when there's something of great value, to turn it on. So the reality for us is that we have the power to say yes and no, to do good, to choose to do good, or to choose to do evil, or worse, to ignore and not see. And then the evil takes over. So we do in this world, if we choose to use it, we have great power both to influence. How do you influence a corporation? You stop buying its products. You stop buying its stock. You say to the CEO or to the president of the corporation, this is unacceptable. Or conversely, you buy enough stock so that you can influence the company on the board level. That's what Warren Buffett does. Now, none of us is Warren Buffett, but, I go to one stockholders meeting a year because it's a friend of mine who owns a company here, and I don't do anything there. I just go to watch. And I watch when there are sometimes very disgruntled stockholders who come to that corporate meeting and say, we are not happy. So they own 1%, 2%, no percent, a minuscule percent, but the corporate hierarchy has to listen. We also, and this is the magnificent thing about this world today, this world used to be run on this male hierarchical image, the corporate ladder. So you started out as the mailman, and the whole idea was that you should move up to be the CEO, right? You climbed the corporate ladder. That's the male hierarchical model. What we have now is, in this growing egalitarian age, we have women coming into the marketplace. We have women in the boardrooms. We have women who are the biggest consumers. And women don't build ladders. They don't build corporate ladders. Women weave networks, and women build networks and weave webs. And often they do that with the compassion that womanhood brings. So it is no coincidence or accident that this egalitarian world has been built up mostly around the internet and the World Wide Web. These are egalitarian things. It used to be if you wanted to be an author, you had to try to write a book, you had to get an agent, you had to get a publisher, you had to be vetted by your peers, you had to have peer-level review, you had to have the publisher say yes, you had to get a review in the New York Times. Now, anybody with access to a computer overnight is an author. Now, there are some great terrible things about this because it's not moderated at all. And so terrible things can go out on the Internet. On the other hand, wonderful things can go out on the Internet. We are connected now in ways that we've never been connected before. I'll just give you this one example. This little girl, you must have seen it in the news all over. This little girl, for her 8th or 9th birthday, her parents said, "What do you want?" She said, "I want to help the little children in Africa have clean water." So they made a little website, and her goal was to collect $325 to buy whatever equipment it was to go to one little village and bring in water. Tragically, this little girl was killed in a car accident, and her story zoomed around the world. And now the parents have collected over $1.5 million, and they've put these water things into 150 villages in Africa. And out of this tragedy, little children have clean, potable water now. Now, without the Internet, that couldn't possibly have happened. But there we are. We can influence the whole world from our desktops. Or now, from a portable telephone, an iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing thing, isn't it?
From your local Starbucks.
Yeah, if we choose to do good, we now have the outlets to do good. If we choose oneness over division, if we choose a world of cooperation over a world of conflict, if we choose a world of love rather than hate, if we choose a world of peace rather than a world of war, we can do that.
But
and God, Anochi, is right behind us, helping us to do that.
But it also requires for us to take responsibility and accept the consequences of the decisions we make, good, bad, or indifferent.
Exactamundo. You're exactly right. So we have those responsibilities, we have those obligations. And so how do I know what's right? Well, I turn to Anochi and I say, I am your child, and you created this world, and you have given me a blueprint for right and wrong. And when I do right, the consequence is, A, I stay connected to you, and B, you know and have shown me how to bring goodness into this world. If I choose not to do right, if I choose to do wrong, if I choose to do evil, if I choose your red panel instead of your blue panel on your beach ball, then what happens is I separate from you. I disconnect from you. And in that separation, in that disconnection, is existential angst and loneliness and consequences to the world.
My experience in when you make that separation or when you don't listen, I'm just going to put it in a different way. When you don't listen, I mean, I ended up writing a book called Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4 because when you don't listen, God...
what a great title.
You know, and tries to get you back in line and gives you the warnings of, you know, hey, pay attention to me. Hey, pay attention to me.
Well, I will tell you something. Here's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. First of all, congratulations on the book. Second of all, congratulations on the brilliant title. And as soon as the program is over, I'm going to go to my computer. I'll tune into Amazon. I'll order your book. And instead of having to go out to a bookstore and see if it's there, and then go to another bookstore, and then go to another bookstore, and then finally order it, and it'll be here 10 days from now, I'll have that book on my doorstep by Tuesday morning. It's an amazing world.
I know, it is amazing.
Now, for authors, it doesn't help us because we make pennies doing it. You know, I used to be able to be my earlier 8 books. I could 6 of them. I could be a working author and make money from writing books and giving some talks. Can't do that much anymore. But so it hasn't been so good personally for me. But what an amazing thing for the world. In an hour from now, I'll go order a book and it'll be on my doorstep by Monday or Tuesday morning.
You know, but one of the things that you said, and I'm just going to say with the Internet example, is that, you know, there are people that put out really good stuff. Right? There's people that put out stuff that is stupid, you know, or whatever, you know, that I don't really look at. But then there are people that put out stuff that's just mean or lies or things that really come from that red side of the beach ball that isn't really helping anybody or society. And, where my mind is kind of going, or, and I know this isn't your area of expertise and not totally mine, but, you in the UFO community, people will put out hoaxes of UFO sightings. Why? I don't even understand the point.
Well, you're right that the Internet can be used for terrible harm as well. But, my experience is, I grew up, I was born in 1947, and that gives away my age, and that means I'm a child of the 60s. But in 1947, the Jewish community into which I was born still had the stench of the smoke of Auschwitz in our nostrils. And so I've grown up with a soul who perished in the Holocaust perched on my shoulder my entire life. And it means that this unbelievable tragedy where this evil person convinced enough people to buy into a program of genocide. The Nazis didn't build machines of war. They built machines of death, of genocide, to wipe out an entire people for no other reason than they were that people. And at the same time, you and I can sit here and I can say these things because men and women of peace and goodwill, slow and reluctant though they were, nevertheless overcame men and women of horrible evil will. And so that's always been both my lament and my rejoicing for this world. And that is, as horrible, horrible, horrible as the Holocaust was, it didn't succeed. And that you and I are sitting here today is the ultimate laugh in Hitler's face because of those men and women of peace and goodwill. So if we can overcome the evil of Hitler, we can overcome the evil of fools on the Internet.
Exactly. And one of the other thing is the whole part about using discernment, and connecting with source to navigate and listen to, well, is this real? Does this resonate with me? Is this the path that I'm supposed to be moving down, or should I be on it in the first place?
Well, that's exactly right. And so one of the great things that we can do is open to what the Bible called prophecy. Now, originally, everybody in biblical times could be a prophet. Everybody could expect to hear from God or see God or envision God or dream God. And at a certain point, for all kinds of internal reasons, the sages cut off the idea of individual prophecy and said continuing revelation comes only through them, so listen to them and they will give us blah, blah, blah. That's happened, and that happened and it stayed in place for some 2,000 years in Jewish life. We're coming to a new period, which I wrote in my book called Soul Judaism, that I call Neshama Judaism, Soul Judaism. Originally that book was called Dancing with God, before it went in the paperback, called Soul Judaism. And there I posit that this coming of Judaism's third era, after the biblical period, after the rabbinic period, this new period, which I'm calling Soul Judaism, I got to name it because no one else has yet, is going to be most characterized by a return to individual prophecy. That means that each and every one of us is always open to intimate conversation and intimate communication with God. So in the book, The Real Name of God, I wrote a little poem prayer meditation which asks God to open our eyes, open our ears, open our senses, open our dreams, open our souls, open our hearts to hearing from, seeing from, envisioning from, dreaming from God. And the more and more each one of us can hear God's will, and we know that God's will is for good, not for evil, the more and more we can have a better world.
Rabbi, it's early for me on this show to take a break now, but I'm feeling like I want to, we're kind of transitioning where we're moving. And so I would like to go ahead and take the break now and then come back and talk more about how we can bring Anoche into our lives.
Anochi.
Anochi.
You know how to say it?
I have no phonics skills. Zero phonics.
I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to give it to everybody. It's the Challah or Hanukkah, but the best way to remember it is Johann Sebastian, say it?
Bach.
Bach. That's it. Perfect. So it's Anochi. Anochi. The Bach. So Johann Sebastian Bach pronunciation.
All right. Well, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back, and we'll talk more about it. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're here talking to Rabbi Wayne Dosick about his book, The Real Name of God. The website is godisanochi, I'll get it one of these days,
Close.
.com. And we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.